Well, I will have a distinct honor in introducing our moderator, and also I know I can be brief because our moderator really doesn't need much introduction at all. Ted Koppel is perhaps the most distinguished broadcast journalist in the U.S. today and perhaps in the world. Best known for his role as anchor and managing editor of ABC Nightline for 25 years. He worked on virtually every major news story in that time. And he went on to produce some stunning long-form documentary material for Discovery. And of course, he has won virtually every major broadcast industry award as well at one time or another. So please join me in welcoming our moderator for today, Ted Koppel.
Thank you. Some years ago, the late, great American author James Michener received a phone call. I know this story because we were together many years ago on Richard Nixon's trip to China. And Michener told me this story personally. Got a call, and the caller said to Michener, our organization, and he named his organization, would like to bestow upon you the award of greatest living American author. And Michener said, that's terrific. When do you want to do it? And the man named a time and place. And Michener consulted his calendar and came back a moment later and said, I'm terribly sorry, but I'm just not going to be able to make it at that time. I already have a pre-existing commitment. And there was a long pause on the other end of the phone, and then the caller said, well, can you think of another greatest living American author? And Michener said, well, yes. He said, how about Kurt Vonnegut or Norman Mailer? And the caller said, no, we already tried them. They couldn't get it out. So I would like to extend my apologies to you. I'm afraid Secretary Clinton couldn't be here this morning. And I'm going to begin by displaying my ingratitude to Dick Solomon and Tara Sonnenschein and Sheldon and my hosts here by expressing to you some cynicism over the subject of public diplomacy. I think public diplomacy, like military music, is something of an oxymoron. I think when the public becomes involved in whatever fashion, it can be helpful, it can be damaging, but it is rarely diplomacy. And let me give you one, I promise this will be fairly quick, and I give you this example only so that we have some place to start, and then you can go anywhere you want. Back in 1991, I think it was, NBC ran a piece that had originally run on the BBC about starvation in Somalia. And it was a truly moving piece of film. So moving, in fact, that Bush 41, the elder President Bush, who had just been defeated by Bill Clinton in the election during that interregnum period that we've just lived through again, sent the Marines to Somalia with what I really believe was a genuinely humanitarian mission. I don't think that there was any other strategic reason for sending the Marines to Somalia at that time. And indeed, lives were saved. Hundreds of thousands of people who might otherwise have starved to death did not. We all know what happened over the months thereafter. U.S. troops stayed perhaps too long. They became embroiled in some of the internecine fighting that was going on in Somalia. Ultimately, there was that famous scene where an American Black Hawk helicopter was shot down. and a dead U.S. Ranger was dragged through the streets of Mogadishu. The indirect consequence of that was, the direct consequence was that President Clinton pulled the U.S. troops out of Somalia as quickly as he could. The indirect consequence was that a couple of months later, when the Hutu began killing Tutsi in Rwanda, the United States and the world at large did nothing. And ultimately, 800,000 people were killed. Could anyone have possibly known, when that first BBC piece was picked up by NBC in this country, and when those terribly moving pictures motivated the U.S. government to do something truly noble and humanitarian, could anyone have dreamed that the ultimate consequence might be that 800,000 people would die without the world lifting a finger? And I'm going to propose that to you, ladies and gentlemen, as sort of a platform from which you can either say, yes, but Koppel, or yes, we agree, but. Kathy Bushkin, you know, I still haven't gotten used to that last name. What's that?
I'm rebranding, Calvin.
I've known Kathy
My public
Bushkin
diplomacy.
for at least 25 years, and I'm shattered to discover that she has stopped waiting for me and has married another. What do you think?
Oh, I'll pick that up. Okay. It may not be too late. I don't know. We'll talk afterward. I'm glad you brought up that anecdote, because I think we focus on words when, in fact, it's actions that really you're reminding us are what drives this whole discussion. And I share your view, and I think Dick raised it too, that public diplomacy conveys something that's between two people and often conveys that it's a one-way street of our communication to others. And the world has changed so much, and we now have this term smart power. In fact, smart power is kind of what community organizing is. It's about what happens around the rest of the world in response to information we all see and share and interact with. So I think the notion that we have control over a communication that goes out and changes the rest of the world is an outdated concept, and that the government no longer can be the sole player or even the dominant player in a world in which NGOs are as active and influential around the world, citizen journalists that we're seeing today, and others. So I think you've reminded us that it's not only a changed world in terms of the communications world we're living in, but in terms of the power sources.
Ed Origen, you've spent many years in diplomacy in the traditional sense. Let me say again, I'm not raising questions about the efficacy of public action. I simply have a problem referring to it as public diplomacy, because it sort of suggests that the public at large or in groups or individually can do things that in previous years might have been left to diplomats. But anyway, you're
well, I share your comment that public diplomacy, like military music, seems to be an oxymoron. In a way, it's an unfortunate phrase, but what it means, I think, and I think Jim Glassman, who was one of my colleagues on the advisory group on public diplomacy toward the Arab and Muslim world in 2003 that we did for Secretary of State Colin Powell in the Congress, we defined in that group public diplomacy as explaining and conducting official outreach to countries and peoples abroad. And we redefined it as first listening and learning, which was not in the equation, listening and learning about the cultures we were dealing with, and then beginning to inform, engage, and influence. That, to me, is the definition of this phrase, public diplomacy. It's a very important aspect of policy. We pulled out of the air when we were doing this work in the Muslim world and going from Indonesia to Nigeria to Europe, Muslim communities, et cetera, that we were criticized saying, but it's the policy, stupid. It's not public diplomacy. It's the policy that forms others' opinions of us. And we agreed. We said, yes. In our work in the Muslim world, we found that, and we pulled this figure out of the air, Ted. It's not a scientific figure, that 80% of the perceptions of the people in the Arab and Muslim world toward the United States were informed by three prisms. The Arab-Israeli conflict, in which they see us as biased toward Israel, that's their perception. Two, Iraq, our invasion of Iraq, that they viewed as an occupation and not a liberation. And third, the hypocrisy of democracy promotion by the United States when we promote democracy, but we support autocratic regimes. Now, whether you like those perceptions or not, those were the perceptions that were forming the worldview of the Arab and Muslim world, and that's the reason why our rankings and our ratings have been so low. The other 20%, if you will, is how we explain our values, our interests, and our policies, public diplomacy. It's a very critical 20%. But we have not done it very well, and I think that's the challenge.
And yet, and Jim Glassman, if you would pick up on this, it strikes me as quite extraordinary that missing among the three major points and among the 20% that you allot to public diplomacy is indeed the one thing that has happened in this country over the last 2 or 3 months. It fits into none of those categories.
Exactly.
It is that we elected an African-American president. It was what we did, not what we said, that has changed the public perception of us. Ambassador Glassman.
Well, actions are important. There's no doubt about that. I mean, the way we define public diplomacy, I think public diplomacy can be defined very precisely. It is understanding, engaging, informing, and influencing foreign publics. So the public part of public diplomacy is what we're interacting with. Now, we use the U.S. public as one of the actors, or groups of actors, in trying to ultimately influence foreign publics. And why do we do that? Because we're trying to reach specific national policy goals. That's where everything begins. So the way we start is to say, what are we trying to do? Well, in the last administration, we were trying to promote freedom and deter threats. And I'm pretty sure this administration will have pretty much the same kinds of goals. And public diplomacy is one means to achieve those goals. Another means is official diplomacy, where the Secretary of State talks to the foreign minister. But public diplomacy is us, that is to say the government or the public or NGOs, having what I like to call a grand conversation, ultimately, with foreign publics, with the intention, again, ultimately, not necessarily in the short term, of influencing them toward reaching those two goals. I think it's a mistake to concentrate only on America's image. So when we talk about, well, we elected President Obama, our ratings are going to go up around the world. But the question is, to what end? It certainly is easier to achieve public policy goals if people like you than if they don't like you. But we can achieve a lot even when people don't like us. And by the way, this business about people not liking us, I think, is a very complicated, very profound issue. It is not true that people around the world don't like us in general. They like us a whole lot in Africa. They like us in places like India and Japan. They specifically don't like us very much in the Middle East and in other Muslim nations and in Europe. But even in those cases, there are many things that we can do with them using public diplomacy in order to achieve our foreign policy goals. So that's what I tried to do in 7 months, and I did it with that as the objective. What we were able to do was introduce what we call Public Diplomacy 2.0, which is using new tools, using internet tools, using social networking to achieve those goals. Because the one thing we learned very clearly, we knew it when we did the Dirigian report, is that people don't want to be preached at. People don't want to sort of sit there and listen to a megaphone. People don't want to hear how wonderful the United States is. They want to engage in a conversation, which ultimately we think is very, very good for us. That's who we are. That's who our brand, that's what our brand is. And I think that's one of the good things about the new president. I think he's going to be able to he's going to be able to reflect that brand, that conversation. And his interview with LRB, I think, is a good example of that.
A few moments ago, Ambassador Solomon made the observation, not once but twice, that the internet is being very effectively used by, and you used the term, the bad guys. The implication of a term like that, of course, is that we are the good guys. And I think we are. But I think it may also be offensive to a lot of people around the world that we so tenaciously cling to that self-image, that we are always the good guys, and anyone who disagrees with us, particularly if they use force, are the bad guys. Mr. Fukara?
I mean, I sincerely believe that the most important capital that any country in the world has is obviously its image, for all sorts of different practical reasons. That's how countries sell themselves culturally and economically in the world. And Secretary Glassman and I discussed the issue of public diplomacy on Al Jazeera twice when he was still in office. And I put to him that very same question that you put to him a little while ago. Now that we have an African-American president who generated so much interest and enthusiasm in the Muslim world, does the United States government need public diplomacy? President Barack Obama is on the record as saying that he wants to reinvigorate relations with the Muslim world, which both sides, the American side and the Muslim side, have been responsible for having thrown to the dogs in recent years. And I sincerely believe that words, as Homer said, have wings. And when the president says those words, they touch people in the Muslim world in all sorts of unpredictable, positive ways. But as the implication in your question is, there's a lot of competition in the Muslim world with the American voice in that part of the world.
May I just interrupt for a second? If, as you say, words have wings, actions have impact, just as a matter of curiosity, how many stations in the United States carry Al Jazeera?
Al Jazeera English so far has not had a particularly warm reception on cable television in this country, so it's still mostly seen on live streaming on the internet.
Is it what, 2 stations?
It's at this particular point in time 3 very small stations.
Oh, so it's a 50% increase over the 2 that it used to be.
But the hope is that now that we have a new administration in town, the hope is that that will spark a new debate in the United States, new dynamics that may hopefully open the door for increasing that number to maybe 4 or 5. But let me just go back to words and actions. I think that the American system, as the American political system, as people saw it in the Muslim world, throughout the election season, right through November 4th, I think that action speaks louder than words. People saw that this is an amazing political system that allows for change and self-renewal. And that is something that people in that part of the world do not have extraordinary amounts of. Now, people in the Muslim world, they look at that the American democracy at work, and they say, yes, please, give us some of that. And then they look at other actions, such as the invasion of Iraq, for example, and they say, please, don't give us any of that. And I think that from where I stand, what the United States has to do is to find a happy medium between using actions and using words to convince people in the Muslim world that this is a message worth listening to. And if I may just affix one final thought for people who may not know, America and the Muslim world have exceptionally unique historical relations. The first country that recognized the independence of the United States was an Arab Muslim nation, and that was Morocco. And I think that tends to get lost on both Americans and Muslims as we get into the clutter of U.S. foreign policy, current U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, as the ambassador talked about it a little while ago.
Mr. McLaughlin, let me come to you in just one moment and jump over to my old friend Jim Zogby, who began appearing on Nightline, what, almost 30 years ago, Jim?
We were kids.
We were both kids, exactly. As you hear this conversation, to what degree do you think it is important, not just what we say to the rest of the world, but what we are prepared to hear from the rest of the world?
We don't do a good job of listening. We say we do. I mean, frequently we go out on these missions and say we want to listen. And when we hear what we don't want to hear, we tune out. We're sort of like the character that S.I. Hayakawa writes about, the American who goes to Mexico and asks for water and is convinced that if he says the word slowly enough, breaks it into 2 syllables and articulates each one, then the dumb foreigner will understand him. Well, the point of the story is that the Mexican is not the foreigner. He's in Mexico, and the guy won't understand him. And yet we continue to speak as if people do understand, but it doesn't resonate at all. And I think that if we did a better job of listening and tuning in, we'd actually hear some good things, in addition to maybe correcting ourselves and learning some lessons. I think my colleague here correctly notes that Iraq was based on not listening. Our policies in the region are largely based on not listening and not being attentive to what people want, but also what they think of us. But on the good side, there is I remember when Charlotte Bierce took over the job that Jim Glassman just finished, she was going to brand America, and the point is you don't need to brand America, it's already branded. And it has 2 conflicting brands. And the one brand is the one we need to understand better, and that is the one that, unlike the Chinese and the Germans and the Japanese, the other great exporting countries in the world, they export product, we export value. People don't go to Starbucks because the coffee's better than the local Arabic grind. They go because they get a little piece of America when they go in the shop. It's sort of like, I hate America. I hate what America's doing. You want to go to Pizza Hut? It's getting a piece of America that's important, and they want our pride. I mean, you go to Saudi Arabia in the malls today, and kids are wearing jeans and basketball jerseys with Iverson or Yao Ming or whatever. I mean, America means something, and to some extent, that value, if we get into it and understand it, is part of our problem. And I would say that the election of Barack Obama is part of the problem too. Expectations, because of the values, are very high. And so the delivery is going to be really important. And I think the president understands that, which is why he said in his interview, my words are one thing, but my actions, I know, ultimately will make a difference here. And so expectations are based on those values. People want to like us. People want to believe in us. And we continue to hurt them. It's almost like the jilted lover syndrome. They expect more from us because we ought to be better. That's the message we send in our product, in the the communications that we do have with the world outside of our government communications, we're sending the message to the world that we really are good people, that we really do care, that we really do value democracy, that we do care about human rights. And Arabs say, well, what about us? What about our human rights? What about our values? What about our concern with democracy? How can you let Lebanon go as long as you did? How could you let this happen in Gaza? How could you do in Iraq and still be talking about it as a great victory, etc.? And that's the disconnect that I think gets us in trouble. One just last point is that in all the polling that we do, we learn that people do like us and don't like our policies. That's true. We also learn that people who know us like us and our values a little bit better. And so one of the other aspects of public diplomacy and the shop that is there that is so important are the exchanges that do take place and that ought to be taking place even on a greater level. People who've come to America to study, businessmen who've come to America to do business, have a better understanding and appreciation and like Americans and our values better. People who just watch our television shows, we found in our polling when we said, did you learn about America from American television? They like America better than those who don't watch American television shows. Actually, the difference between those who watch American television shows and those who've come to America is rather minuscule. So actually by just growing up on Gunsmoke actually makes you feel a little bit better about America and the image that we project and the values that we hold dear. So I think we need to look at the total inventory, make better use of that inventory, and then listen better, yes, and deal with policies which are so critical in a way that comports with those values and helps reinforce them instead of undercut them, because we too frequently trump our message with the things we do.
Mr. McLaughlin, let me just make note of the fact that we're going to come to your questions right after this. I just wanted you to hear from each of our panelists first. Are we making a mistake? Is it maybe just a misnomer to refer to public diplomacy? I think we all get what it is meant to do, but by intermingling it with diplomacy, which is a very narrow but deep and profound skill, we may be confusing the issue. Or am I just confused?
Well, so the short answer is yes. The longer answer is this. Let me say a word about the context that the internet creates, and then say what I think the implications are for the project of public diplomacy as Ambassador Djurigian and Jim Glassman have defined it. So here's the context. The context is that over the last, many years, but certainly over the last 15, the cost of computing power has plummeted, meaning that the amount of processing and storage power that you are able to hold in your hand now in a BlackBerry or in your laptop is incredible. And what this means for the world of communications and self-expression is that the average 16-year-old with an off-the-shelf laptop now has what even 10 years ago would have been regarded as a staggering amount of power to create videos, write text, and speak. When I was a teenager growing up in the 80s, the ability that I had to be on television was zero, to be on the radio was zero, to be in newspapers was zero. My ability to communicate was limited to my friends and family, people immediately around me. Now, the average teenager, as a default, can speak to literally anybody in the world that's got an internet connection instantly. Through video and through text, and if you've seen videos on YouTube lately, you can see that the level of professionalism that an Apple laptop gives them is incredible. So that's on the production side. The other thing which the internet brings is now virtually free distribution. So once you've created your video or you've written your blog post or whatever it might be, it costs you zero to have it be available to anybody in the world. And so this is an incredible shift. We call it democratization. We call it distribution of content, or whatever weird businessy phrase you want to use for it. What it really means is that individuals now have the ability to speak and to speak with each other in ways that were never possible before. So information is power, and when you change the equations of the creation and distribution of information, you change power dynamics. You mentioned before terrorist organizations using the internet. That's one example of how this democratization can have good sides and bad sides, but the bottom line is it is a democratization. So the consequence of that for the project of public diplomacy, I think, is very straightforward, which is that an edifice architected in Washington will fail. So the usual diplomatic effort of figuring out what your message is, figuring out how to convey it. In internet terms, what this usually means is designing a gorgeous, gold-plated, extremely attractive website with lots of little nooks and crannies and all kinds of exquisitely crafted prose in local languages is going to be a useless white elephant. These kinds of communication efforts, whether it's one-to-many television programs or efforts where there is an authoritative speaker and an unwashed mass of listeners, will fail. And so the alternative is a very upsetting one for the traditional practitioners of diplomacy, which is the alternative is modest, small, incremental, one-on-one efforts to get to know people, to engage with them, to speak with them, and so forth. That is much likelier to succeed. And so I'll conclude by just saying that things which have succeeded in the internet, whether it's Google and YouTube or Facebook or MySpace or whatever, they are not content. They are places that you go. And the people that are there with you fill it with content and engage in communication and dialogue and so forth. But so they are places, not things. And so from the perspective of public diplomacy in the United States, we need to, A, take advantage of the places that are out there and be there as Americans, as officials, American officials, but also just as Americans. And the other is create places that people are going to want to go to. And these are not places where they're going to be lectured at, where they're going to be propagandized. They're places where people can meet other people that they're interested in meeting, and ideally to do something. So if I were, sketching out a plan for public diplomacy, it would look something like that.
Can I just add to this, Tim? Because
I'll tell you what, no. The answer is no, because otherwise you'll add to it after the first question comes, and you'll find a way of weaving it in.
I certainly will.
Who would like to ask the first question here? Because otherwise go ahead, please.
I'm Frank Ricciardone. I'm with the United States Institute of Peace at the moment, and I have been a U.S. ambassador. It was my privilege to serve in Egypt and in the Philippines. And I've learned a lot at the feet of Ed Region, among others, and have, in fact, studied the work that James Glassman did and many others over many years on public diplomacy. Several of you have come back to the new forms of communication and the importance of listening. Almost 20 years ago, Ambassador Jirijan charged me as a young political officer to report timely, accurate, relevant information. It's not as if people in the State Department haven't been had as part of their mission for a long time to listen and to understand and to report it in a timely, accurate, and relevant way. But I ask each of you from your different perspectives, what have you found works? What are the best practices? When have you found the beast of the U.S. government, of the State Department, most obviously listening? What has worked? What hasn't worked? Some of us have served in the belly of the beast, others on the outside. When is it clear that the United States government is working? What are the cheap parlor tricks of diplomacy that you've found to be effective? And how can we best apply those?
And while you're thinking of a way to weave in your answer there, Ambassador Glassman, you can also take one that came in off the web here and see if you can work on both of these together. I hope someone asks Mr. Glassman why BBG wants to axe VOA's English service when Radio China International has gone to 24-hour English.
That must have been sent from across the street.
Should I answer that question?
Please.
BBG stands for Broadcasting Board of Governors, which I used to chair, and which is a separate agency of public diplomacy. Some would argue it actually doesn't have anything to do with public diplomacy, but I would differ with that. The BBG has to make decisions about allocating resources. Right now, it broadcasts in 60 languages to about 100 countries. And one of the questions was, should BBG, which really defined itself as, or VOA, defined itself as a vernacular broadcaster, should it continue to broadcast in English, especially in a world in which there is CNN and BBC and so forth? And the answer of the board was that English would be scaled back. And I thought that was a good decision. We still broadcast in English, or BBG still broadcasts in English to Africa, where it's very, very important. Also broadcasts in English in a way where people who don't know very much English can learn it. But the sort of big global English broadcasting is being scaled back. But on the other hand, English on the internet is being expanded. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Let me just associate, I'm not going to weave this at all. I just want to associate myself with Andrew's remarks. I think he's absolutely right on target. And I have to say that it took me a few months to learn that he was right. And I think I spent the last 3 or 4 months trying to implement exactly that policy. And I disagree a little bit because from what he said about this edifice cannot be created in Washington. I think that's what he said. I think that's true. However, Washington can get the ball rolling. Washington can be an instigator. I can give you many examples. One of them was started by my former colleague, Golia Mary, who was the Assistant Secretary for Education and Cultural Affairs, which is, as far as we know, the first government social networking site called Exchanges Connect. And it's quite remarkable. And it does, as Andrew said, there's stuff going on within this site that does not comport with American policy. There are people talking about things that are going on in Gaza, for example, which some people on the Hill are going to complain about and say, gee, why are we using American taxpayer dollars to provide a forum like this? And the answer is that I don't think it's just listening. Listening is important, but it's really engaging in a conversation. Listening, I think, is a little bit condescending. Oh, we're going to go on a listening tour and sort of hear what you have to say. No. We're going to participate in a big conversation. And I think that's what we've been trying to do. And actually working with companies like Google, we helped create something called the Alliance of Youth Movements, which is just about to launch itself as a 501c3. But what's important is it was a public-private partnership that brought together groups from around the world, mainly young people, mainly people working online, who are anti-violence, pro-social change, and in many cases don't necessarily agree with American policies. So it presents a real challenge, I think, to normal diplomacy, to the kinds of things that we've always tried to do, because the kind of control that the State Department and other institutions of government have always tried to exert. That's very difficult in this new world. But to us, there's no way that we can possibly reach the kind of policy goals that I talked about unless we participate in a conversation, not preaching at people, but conversing with people.
Ed Dirigian.
I want to pick up what Jim and Andy had said. I think the great challenge that whoever is going to be in charge, well, the president in charge of our public diplomacy, he is truly the voice of America, as typified by his interview on Al Arabiya to the Muslim world. But what we're hearing, I think, today is this grand conversation has to be reorganized in a way in which all these instrumentalities of the internet and the web and cell phones and all of this to engage into the conversation in ways we've never done before. Jim may no longer agree with me because now he was an official now in the government. But when he was with me in our group, we were highly critical of the BBG's decision to establish U.S. government-sponsored television network in the Arab world, Al Hurra and Radio Sawa, the radio program. Because one of the things we learned when we went out into the Muslim world is that the people in these countries, especially in the Arab countries, are very skeptical of any television satellite or any television station that is sponsored by a government, because they've been brought up in a culture where those television stations are totally propaganda. So we advocated the creation of a public-private foundation that would actually purchase copyright, volume, videos, content of some of the best that America produces in terms of entertainment, in interview shows, and public policy shows, and provide that free of charge to the hundreds of television stations and radio stations in the Middle East. I think that should be married with the potential of what we have on the internet and cell phones. Al Jazeera, which at times is highly criticized in our country because of its perceived bias. But we said in our report in 2003, whatever you think of Al Jazeera's political content, Al Jazeera, we called it electronic perestroika in the Arab world. Why? Because if you lived in the Arab world, Ted,
20, 30 years ago.
30 years, as you know, you turn on a television station and there's martial music and a chief of state and a prime minister, and there's this ridiculous commentary. And all of a sudden you have something like Al Jazeera that pierces into the living rooms or the bedrooms of the Arab families, I don't know, about 30 million, and is providing live coverage. You have an Al Jazeera correspondent in Israel. You have an Al Jazeera correspondent in Gaza. You have an Al Jazeera correspondent in Washington. And what Al Jazeera did is it broke through this state-controlled system. So what I'm advocating at this point, and the challenge is going to be great to the new administration, is reorganizing public diplomacy, but by using instrumentalities that are not viewed as propagandistic, but that gets the word across in a way that this new age of the internet has provided us.
Jim Zogby, I know you wanted to get in, and then we'll take your questions.
Yeah, just a couple of little observations. One is we continue to talk about the Muslim world. And frankly, we are talking about many worlds, and we ought to really be clear about that.
Right.
There is an Arab world, and then there is a South Asian, largely Pakistani, but also Indian Muslims, and then there's Indonesia, et cetera. And you frankly can't talk to them in one voice, because if you're on Al Jazeera or Al Arabiya or any other Arab network, you're talking to Arabs and only Arabs. It's not reaching Pakistan. They don't understand the language. And so we really, and there are different concerns. There are some, there's some sort of deep culture language, but there's no Christian world and there's no Muslim world. And so I think we need to be clear about that as we're doing public diplomacy or tailoring our message to wherever we're tailoring it. The second is about Arab media. When I talked about listening, that's part of it. I remember some of the conversations at the time in the Council on Foreign Relations. We were having this discussion about Al-Hurra and having a network, and people were saying, it's so important that we bring them Meet the Press. Well, number one, it's not really important for most Americans to have Meet the Press. I mean, it's... I'm not sure putting it in Arabic is going to make it any more interesting for most viewers in the region.
How about this week with George Stephanopoulos?
That, on the other hand, is a real hit. No, the point is though, is that they're already getting Meet the Press. If you watch Arab television today, after the CNN, Al Jazeera explosion, there is nothing that you can want to watch that you can't watch. It's available to you. And so the question is, where's the value added with an American network that is bringing programs that they don't want to watch? And the answer is, it's not there. So what should we be doing if we were listening? What we should be doing is doing joint ventures and partnerships, public-private partnerships, to help co-produce programming. I've worked now on with three Arab networks. The most recent one is Abu Dhabi Television, where I've been for a number of years. We've bought quality programs and then had group discussions about them. We did The Roots of 9/11 with Tom Friedman at Ground Zero, engaging in a live conversation with students in the Arab world. We did dialogue, students here in America and students in Baghdad before, during, and 4 years later, to talk about the different perceptions of each other. That, frankly, is the best public diplomacy, and we were doing it on our own, but we were doing it with the cooperation of American networks who helped us get involved in that process. And I think that sometimes when I say listening, it's not just going out and like holding your ear and saying, talk to me. It's paying attention to what is going on in those societies so that we're providing them a product that they want and a value added to what is. Right. I think too often we don't.
Abderrahim, you just wanted to make a
Yeah.
quick comment, and then we'll come to your question. And Tara, what time do you want us to finish this session?
Well, we want to make sure we get also Oscar Morales in at some point.
All right, very good. Excellent. 10:45. All right, so we've got 25 minutes for the segment. Please go ahead.
I wanted to say a quick thing or two about government-funded television. And I feel a little skittish saying this in the strongest hold of, the biggest stronghold of the capitalist world. I really think that in terms of public diplomacy and dialogue between various nations, the future is for government-funded television stations. Government-funded television stations do carry the risk of being manipulated for the specific purposes of the government that funds. Fine. But I think if we try to rely on private-funded television to generate the kind of debate that we're talking about now, that's just not going to happen, because private television is not about educating people about other nations. It's about the cash nexus. That's number one. And that takes me back to what the ambassador said about Al-Hurra. My background is actually in BBC. I worked in BBC for over 10 years. And BBC was the leading news outlet in terms of audience and credibility in the Arab world. Knowing full well that people in the region knew full well all along that it was actually funded by the British government, and knowing full well that the BBC was originally set up to counter Nazi propaganda during World War II. But that never stopped people in the Arab world to actually trust the BBC. And I think that had something to do not so much with the fact that it was funded by the government of the UK or not. It had something to do with the editorial line that the BBC took on various issues. And that is something that people sympathized with in the Arab world and believed and gave a lot of credence and credibility to.
This gentleman has been very patient. Can we get a microphone to him? Thank you.
Hi, I'm John Marks from Search for Common Ground. And I would just want to say in reaction to Mr. McLaughlin's comments that what you're talking about works brilliantly in the United States and Western Europe. But in most of the places we work around the world, in the Middle East particularly, and in Africa, there isn't broadband access. And these mechanisms of communicating don't exist for 99 or 95% of the people. Now, there are places in the Arab world where that's not true in the Gulf, but it's certainly true in the Levant. And that you need to be appropriate, or one needs to be appropriate with one's technology. And we do a lot of production of radio soap opera, which is an old paradigm, old way of doing it. It's dead in this country. But in Burundi, we get 91% listenership. And we do it always produced locally because you can't do it from 5,000 miles away. You can't have the cultural insight. What you can do is bring together the organizing. You might be able to bring together the production skills and help and set up the studio. But the writers, the actors, all have to be local. So I think there needs to be a decentralized approach to public diplomacy, which, frankly, from the State Department we don't get, because it's always to try to bring America to the world. Though you're changing.
No, I must say I disagree with it. I mean, I agree with your premise, but I don't think that's true. Okay. that we're some sort of monolith. In fact, we support exactly what you're talking about. We have a terrific program in Pakistan of exactly this kinds of soap operas you're talking about. So I think you have to look at every country individually. Okay. But one thing I would say is that as far as the Internet is concerned, and I know you're going to have Oscar Morales from Colombia here in a second, what Oscar found, and he built the No Mas FARC movement into a movement that put 12 million people into the streets last February. He did it in places that don't have any Internet access at all, but he did it through Facebook anyway. And there's a lot more access than than you and I completely understand. And certainly in the future, that's where the action is. But it's not the only action, that's for sure. I mean, the BBG is broadcasting, VOA is broadcasting into North Korea right now as we sit here using AM radio. It's an amazing achievement, an incredible achievement. For the first time, they're broadcasting non-jammed signals into North Korea. Well, that's not the internet. That's the old stuff. But you have to look at individual countries.
You gave us such a good introduction here to Oscar Morales. Kathy, I promise to come back to you in a moment, but Oscar Morales is in fact standing by. Let me just, those of you who don't know it, although Ambassador Glassman gave you the headlines here, is an engineer from Colombia. On the 4th of January 2008, Morales started a group, 1 Million Voices Against the FARC, on the social networking site Facebook. Within 1 week, over 100,000 people had joined the online movement. And Mr. Morales, why don't, if you can hear me all right, why don't you pick up and explain where it went from there? Coming up on the screen, even better.
Signal is down. Kathy should go first.
All right.
We're getting it back up.
Very good. These are, as I learned over the years, I'll tell you a story later on about the joys of when the satellite goes down. But Kathy, please.
Excuse me, can I just,
The technology
if
problem.
I could just finish?
Of course.
But I would agree with what the ambassador just said, and I'm saying it should be both. That the NGOs have the agility, the nimbleness to probably react in a quicker way and in a way, and unfortunately the government funding tends to get swept up in the larger programs and has not trickled down enough to my mind. So I think it should be both. And what Ambassador Dirigian was saying about the need for a kind of a national endowment for democracy type thing is probably the way to go to make sure the government hand is not too heavy-handed.
I make a distinction, Ted, that's very important. But I make a distinction between state-controlled television and government-funded television. That's a very, I was talking about state-controlled television that has been.
Do you consider Al-Hurra state-controlled or government-funded?
No. What I'm saying.
No, it's an interesting question.
I don't consider it state-controlled. But
I
what
don't
I'm
think it
saying
is
is that I
state-controlled.
thought no, that's not my criticism of Al-Hurra. My criticism of Al-Hurra is that I think the taxpayers' money could be spent much more wisely in this corporate. Non-profit organization. That's my comment on Al-Hurra. I'm not.
Somebody's got to say this though, which is that debating state-funded television versus private sector television is like debating whether the Titanic should be state-funded or privately funded.
Wrong now.
Television is going down as a medium,
Right.
And it's going to be around for a while. No, I mean seriously though, it's going to be around for a while. Radio is clearly going to be around for much of the world for a long time to come. But this debate feels pretty stale to me. A more interesting debate is how to take advantage of the tools that are going to be coming and will be ubiquitous within the next 5 to 10 years.
Oh, Andrew, I can't let you get away with that. I really can't. And let me just say very simply, it ain't the medium, it's the message. The most enduring message of all time was carved into 2 tablets of stone. Lousy medium, great message.
Well, I'll just jump into that. I agree that we're debating the wrong thing. There's mobile phones as well that are changing everything, and we're so internet focused in this country, so I think we also need to remember that that's another technology. I'd say there's 2 immediate things that this government could do also to put its money where its mouth is. You know, for a tenth of the amount of money that it was spent on foreign aid this last year, NGOs around the world were training journalists. So when we listen, we need to empower the voices that need to tell the stories of their countries, their values, their issues, and perhaps even stories about the United States. So we need to empower local journalists around the world. There's lots of organizations, Search for Common Ground, Internews, and others that do that. And second, I would just say engaging with institutions multilaterally like the United Nations is another way we show that we're listening and not just talking. Thanks.
I see Oscar Morales up on the screen. Can you hear me all right? We have a 9-minute delay here, which is going to cause some problems. Mr. Morales, can you hear me? This is Ted Koppel in Washington.
Good morning, everybody. Hi, I'm Oscar Morales from Colombia.
Yes, I will tell you in just a moment. We're having a little bit of an interrupted signal here. So if I cut you off, please forgive me.
Yes, I can hear you clearly. Thank you.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about how your movement got started and what you think people here can learn from it that can be extended to other parts of the world.
Thank you.
See what I mean about this lousy medium? It's that's the internet for you. This never would have happened on television.
Well, it was a very, very, very emotional moment for us Colombians. In December 2012,
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I know how difficult this is when you're having trouble hearing me and the signal comes on a delay. But you just go ahead.
there was the announcement of the release of a little child that was in captivity. This child was only 4 years old. There was the announcement of the release of a little child in captivity. This child was only 4 years old. And so later we discovered that this child had been abandoned in the middle of the jungle, and that created a huge rage and anger among the population, and that gave us courage to initiate a protest, initially in a virtual environment. Later we discovered that this child had been abandoned and then we proposed the protest via Facebook. That is a very famous social network here in Colombia with millions of users. So what we didn't know is that Facebook itself was going to be a very good vehicle to spread this protest. And in a matter of 1 week, we hit the media, we hit the television, radio, with the amazing number of people that joined our cause. And in just 15 days, our group had grown to the amazing amount of 150,000 members. And television and all journalists were wondering, how was that possible that such media network as Facebook was able to convoke, join so many people around one cause? So it was a new event in a country like ours. What we did in that time was to take all this trend, all this amazing amount of people, and convince them to go out to the streets. So we planned 1 month later. The group was born on January 4th, and then we proposed that on February 4th, we were going to go out to the streets and protest against the FARC. As you already know, FARC is the most the oldest rebel movement in Colombia. It's very dangerous. They have killed many people, and they have 700 people in captivity. So people were really motivated to do that, to hit the streets, to flood the streets on February 4th. And during that time, what we did was to spread the word using all kind of tools. We use Facebook, we use mail, we use blogs, we use all kind of web pages, and we convince other webmasters, any other websites to publish our information, and we did a complete campaign. It was like what you can compare it to a presidential campaign. I mean, speaking everywhere, giving a lot of interviews, on the radio, interviews on the television, and there was a time, 15 days before the protest, that the international media got acquainted of what we were doing, and they were also very amazed that young people with no prior experience in politics were hitting Facebook and using Facebook to spread the word about something that we planned to be very big. So international media was really following us. They also published all the news in their newspapers in the United States. I remember Le Monde from France and El País from Madrid, very, very important newspaper, very important media, and they were listening. So we also convoked the many Colombians that were living outside the world. And that's what gave really impact to what we prepared. Because if you only protest in your own country, it has not the same impact as when you do it with the help of so many Colombians in other countries. And then we managed to convince millions and millions of Colombians in 200 cities around the world to do the same thing that we were planning to do in Colombia. And the result was really amazing. More than 12 million people, Colombians and not Colombians, joined the streets that day, February 4th, in more than 200 cities, in more than 40 countries in the world. Simultaneously, at the same time, we prepared to be at 12 noon Colombian time, and at the same exact time, all the other 200 cities were marching against the FARC with the same message: no more kidnapping, no more lies, no more death, no more FARC. And if you ask me if we really expected that result, I can tell you honestly, never. We never expected that this call had such power of convincing. We convinced people. I guess that we were young and people really believed in us. And we were really proud of what we did.
Mr. Morales, I thank you very much. This is going to be a little bit too difficult to conduct an interview, but I'm going to take what you have just said and what you have told us here and ask some of our panelists to react to it. And the first question I would ask is this sort of the ultimate example of public diplomacy? And to what degree can it be replicated, or should it be replicated?
Can I?
Okay.
Well, Oscar is a great hero, and I went to Colombia a few months ago to see him, and was inspired by what he did. And as a result, within a fairly short period of time, with some terrific help from people at the State Department like Jared Cohen, and we put together a public-private partnership, including Facebook, Google, MTV, Columbia University, Howcast, and many others, and then brought 24 groups similar to Oscar's together in New York with very little money and a lot of private sector support in what I think was a very important public diplomacy achievement. And there you see that the role of the State Department, the role of government, was extremely minor. We didn't hide it. You know, we got the ball rolling. We're very proud of it. But essentially, we turned it over to the private sector. They're really good at it. And what they created was a hub, you can go online and see it now, where groups from around the world can learn best practices and find out how to build anti-violence, pro-social change groups. And why did we do this? We did it because the policy objective is to deter threats, and specifically, it is to divert young people from taking a path that leads them to be violent extremists. So, in my opinion, this was definitely a major achievement of public diplomacy, but absolutely not a conventional one.
What 2 or 3 other examples can you cite that have metastasized, in a sense, out of this one example? Is there anything similar that has happened? It's been a year. Is there anything similar that's happened anywhere else in the world?
Well, there are quite a few examples. And first of all, you know, Oscar's quite modest. Really what he achieved was not just putting people in the streets, but actually demoralizing the FARC and causing many people to leave, many of these foreign fighters to leave the FARC. So it had real-life consequences. Well, we've done things like supported an organization in Europe. And again, it's just a little bit of support from us to get the ball rolling, called Sisters Against Violent Extremism, which is a group of women who have had family members killed by violent extremists. This is a network. This is it has an internet presence. It had a conference. And this network is being built out not with our help, but just with our little nudge, let's call it. We have the IIP, which is one of the 2 bureaus under public diplomacy, Jeremy Curtin is here, who runs IIP, and this started before I got there. They began something called the Democracy Video Challenge, which was really quite revolutionary. The idea here, again, it was a public-private partnership that produced a contest where people around the world produced 3-minute videos on the subject democracy is. And those videos are posted now on YouTube. We have cooperation from the Directors Guild and the and NYU. It's a tremendous public-private partnership. And again, we don't control it. The State Department doesn't control it. People are going to be making videos that may be critical of U.S. policy.
May I just ask, Abderrahim, one would think that in a place like Iraq, for example, or in Afghanistan for that matter, you have an analogous kind of situation where local groups are engaging in great violence against ordinary people, and where if this kind of example could be replicated, that it would sort of spontaneously combust. If anyone had ever heard about what was going on in Colombia. I mean, when I say if anyone had ever heard about it, if someone in Afghanistan heard about that and said, what a terrific idea, why don't we do that? Has anyone done anything like that?
Not to any significant extent resembling what happened with the FARC issue. And I think whatever I have to say will tie into what you said about the internet. I think if the internet existed at the time of King Lear, he would have said, a laptop, my kingdom for a laptop. And in the Arab and Muslim world, look, American King Lear is not going to ride that horse in the Arab and Muslim world for a long time because, A, the problem of connectivity is still very limited. And there's an even bigger problem, which is the problem of literacy. The issue of connectivity, now that you have the Indians talking about churning out a laptop that costs $20, that may see the development of the internet in the region by leaps and bounds. But the issue of literacy is going to take a long time. So I think to replicate what happened with the FARC in a place like in the Muslim world with regard to Iraq or Afghanistan, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. But the potential is there for the internet. But it's not going to kill television in the Arab world. Satellite television, I think, will remain for a very long time the medium of predilection in that part of the world.
So even asking the question about how do you replicate something like what Oscar did in Colombia is sort of the wrong question. You can't replicate it. The State Department didn't launch Oscar's.
Indeed, if I may, I was trying to make precisely that point. It should have self-replicated. There should have been spontaneous combustion. And I'm asking, did that happen?
Yeah, let me just say it did happen, and as a result, this group, and we had nothing to do with it, is now planning a major march in March around the world.
Which group?
Focusing the 25 online groups that got together in New York have connected with other groups, and as a result, there's going to be a march. And you know, this is self-replicating. It doesn't really have anything. The State Department certainly didn't organize it.
So Oscar's group is quite spectacular, but I think the real story is in the smaller, more locally self-organizing groups that come up in the context of a specific problem. It may be, I can think of, just in the last like 2 or 3 months, a group of Indian activists organizing around a highway that was going to go in a particular direction. They thought it should go somewhere else. And again, like, yes, connectivity is limited. Yes, the tools are limited. But people's ability to get online in even the remotest parts of the world, thanks to data over mobile networks, internet cafes, local schools, these kinds of things, is much greater than we normally think. Otherwise, there wouldn't be 2 billion email accounts worldwide. It's more than we think. So, from a policy perspective, what this means is that it would be very smart for the United States to be doing everything we can to get connectivity into the hands of as many people as possible. If you think that American values are fundamentally embodied and represented by the internet with its very decentralized, very democratized approach to communication, that would be a very smart move for us. And by the way, publicly funding stone tablets is probably not the right way to go. The medium does, in this context, actually matter because it both embodies a way of communicating and it enables the kinds of self-organization that we've seen. Even though terrorists are going to use it, the good vastly outweighs the bad, and that's something that we should be fundamentally, I think, behind.
Kathy, you've been waiting very patiently to get into all of this.
Well, I sort of said what I was going to say earlier, but I would just say I think also the blogger community is an important one that we need to think through. How do we interact with them? How do we listen and learn from them? It's a very different community, and yet there's and they're not a cohesive community with one standard brand or one standard look, so I think learning how to do that. I would say two other examples to look at are Avaz.org, which is now 3.5 million people. Avaz means voices in lots of languages, and they've done both online and offline petitions to change the G8 on climate and all sorts of things. So we're seeing this as a global phenomenon, and Queen Rania has a YouTube channel for Muslim youth that is quite amazing in terms of allowing them that communication.
We have a question over here, please.
Hi, I'm Cynthia Schneider. I run the Arts and Culture Dialogue Initiative at the Brookings Institution and teach diplomacy at cultural diplomacy at Georgetown, and used to be the ambassador to the Netherlands. And we have to talk because they think they were the first people to recognize America. So we have to sort this out. I said the wrong thing for 3 years, I think. In fact, Barbara Tuchman wrote a book about it. But
we just check the timestamp on the scroll.
Don't worry about debating the future. We got to debate the past. But there's another key thing, many key things that the U.S. and the Muslim world share. One is the concept of the pen is mightier than the sword, which originated in a hadith of the Prophet, and then, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Paine, everyone else picked it up. And that leads me to one thing about popular culture and television. I'm sorry, I'm a strong television defender here. I'm on the John Mark side. There just was a survey that showed that the most significant thing in changing women's and children's lives in India and Brazil was television, the introduction of television into the village. And that changed their views of themselves and their lives and what it could be. They sought education. So I'm all for connecting, and I think we should give a lot more support to projects that do. But for a long time, the world is just not going to be in Silicon Valley, and I think we have to be more creative about using the tools that are working in different places, which leads me, the creative, to a word I haven't heard, artists. A lot of talk about public diplomacy, but what about the content? When you talk about conveying values, you convey them explicitly or implicitly, something that is conveying core ideas about democracy, of merit-based competition with a fair selection of the winner by voting is, guess what? American Idol. And the program Afghan Idol, for example, in Afghanistan, has done incredible things to unite the population across different ethnic groups and to introduce, I'm sorry, not even more than the elections, which are not always the winner winning, the idea of a merit-based competition, a radical idea in many, many societies, and here the people are participating. I mean, who would have thought it, American Idol? So I think we need to be maybe a little more imaginative in what you think about of what works, and what about the artists? I mean, who are the people who push the boundaries and, through their creative expressions, do criticize society, do get people to look outside society. That is an American tradition in public diplomacy. That's what we did with the jazz musicians and the writers, many other people in the past. So I'm asking, what are your experiences of creative expression as a component of this, and also dissent?
If you're not careful, you'll soon have the Moroccans claiming that they were first to recognize the independence of Holland from the Habsburg Empire.
I remember back when we first did some polling on media viewership. Most popular rated show was not the news. and Hate in America. The most popular rated show actually was a variation on the Who Wants to Be a Millionaire that was being carried on. I mean, Arabs play with the remote control as much as Americans do. And my network, Abu Dhabi, then had a show called Your Weight in Gold, which the contestant would win their weight in gold, blah, blah, blah. It was and it was very popular. And right now, on one of the great heroes in the Arab world is the person who won the Idol program in Lebanon. And in Abu Dhabi, its channel has one of its most popular shows is actually a poetry competition, a very classic Arab poetry competition. And that leads me back to this other discussion, which is, it is true that the internet is the future, but too many places still are not yet in the past. I mean, we live in a world where about 50% of the world still does not have telephone use. I mean, talk about gaps. That's a huge one to deal with.
Jim, let me just jump in and read one of the blogs because it expands on the point you're making. This one is from Bahrain. There is a war on the internet in the Middle East. Blogs, websites, and social networking sites are blocked by governments. Are there any plans to address this issue with such governments? Ambassador Glassman?
Actually, one of the ways that we have addressed it is through this network that I was talking about that really came out of Oscar's work. Howcast has produced, with our encouragement, 7 videos about, most of them are about how to organize online, but one of them is about how to get around internet blockages. And some of them are difficult to get around, but there are a lot of tips there on how to do it. This is a problem that, that the BBG, the Broadcasting Board of Governors, has wrestled with for many, many years and has gotten to be pretty good at it. And in general, offense beats defense, but there are countries like China that where it becomes, it's pretty hard to get around blockages, but it's absolutely not impossible.
In defense of television for a second here, you know, one of the things that the questioner sort of raised that I think is really worth focusing on is when the American Idol model went to China, the Communist Party had to struggle its way through what to do about voting. Are they really going to allow people to vote, you know, through SMS text messages for an idol? Because that might raise in their mind the question of like why they can vote for an idol, but they can't vote for anything else that matters. And it was fascinating to see. They actually forced the program not to allow it, and then tried to transform it into something else, and eventually a year later just gave up and allowed the voting to happen. There are, you know, there are ways to get around internet blockages, and I think, again, the better connected the world is, the less possible it is for any government to control it. And again, I'll just say I think that should be a big focus of American policy. And also American diplomacy, by the way. You know, Google suffers from a lot of this. Our blogging service is blocked through at least half of the Middle East. Morocco, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Iran, Syria, all block YouTube and Blogger in some combination. And there's a role for diplomacy, traditional official diplomacy there too, by the way. But anyway, making stuff that people want is probably the best, you know, is like America's greatest, highest value skill, right? Like we have the best marketers, market researchers, pollsters, and so forth. And if you take that model, and let me say, when I say that television is going down, I don't mean that professionally produced, high-quality video that people want to watch is going down. That's going to be with us for the rest of our lives and well beyond. I just mean that the broadcast airwaves medium of you've got to sit and watch a scheduled program when it gets shoved at you is going down.
No, absolutely.
And so in the meantime, you know, if we can, you know, marshal sort of American creative talent to, you know, to tackle that problem, you will end up with American Idol in China confronting people with the reality of voting in a way that's probably very productive in the long term.
Let me just ask one last question, which I hope will give an opportunity to one or two of you to summarize. We've got to close this in about 2 minutes. Somebody on the panel referred to the democratization of information. And I kind of cringe when I hear that word being used, because democratization in the sense that the internet has democratized is exactly what our founding fathers tried to avoid. This notion of everybody out there having a say in, a role in the function of government. That's why we have representational government. Does somebody want to pick up the notion that maybe having absolute democratization of information without the gatekeepers that we have had in years past may not be the smartest idea in the world?
I think that the distinction there is between the so-called democratization of information being the incredible accessibility of information through the internet and these new vehicles. But that, it's not a either-or proposition. We have representative government in which that's the way we govern. We govern ourselves, we elect representatives who govern us. So I don't think it's a contradiction. It's just that there's much more information out there with these new vehicles. I would like to say one last thing in terms of this whole idea of public diplomacy. One of our teams in Morocco, go back to Morocco, a woman in Morocco told us that if you Americans do not define yourselves, the extremists will define you. And I think that's one of the greatest challenges we have, is how we define ourselves, everything we've been talking about, the modalities. And the other thing I want to say very shortly is that one thing that really bolstered us in our group in 2003 was that while there was high criticism of our policies, there was tremendous support for American values. It meant equality of opportunity, equality before the law, the American educational system, et cetera, et cetera. So we do have a lot to work with. So I think the question is not that we're in dire straits, but we just have to do a much more intelligent job.
Can I just link democratization with defining ourselves?
Sure.
I really think, you had said earlier that it's not the medium, it's the message. I would actually differ with that. I think in this case, it is the medium, because the medium, which is a democratic and chaotic and uncontrolled medium, actually I think is an American medium. I think it does define us. I think one of the reasons that we use these tools and we'd like to be identified with these tools is that we're not the loudspeaker. Now, over the last 8 years, a lot of people criticized this administration for being a loudspeaker. I don't think those criticisms were accurate, but whether they were accurate or not, that's what people thought. I think that the image of America as being a place, an agora, a place where we bring people together to talk and to debate and to argue, that's a great image. And I think that is really what we're all about. And that's why these tools, which is really all they are, actually help to reinforce what I think is the right image of America and the image we want to communicate around the world.
Good.
One thing, Ted, is that democratization, yes, what it really amounts to is choices of information sources. And one of the dangers I think that we need to deal with is that when you have a choice, frequently you pre-select or you self-select the choice you want. So it ends up, even with the multiple set of opportunities you have, you end up going to the channel, or you go to the blog site, or you go to the information source that reinforces values you already have. There's a danger in that.
You see, Jim, the one thing that always happens is, and it happens whether you're doing it on television, radio, I assume on the internet also, just when the debate really gets going, some idiot has to say, I'm terribly sorry, but we're out of time. We will be back 11:15. All right, so 15 minutes from now, and I ask you in joining me in thanking our panel.